Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Uncommon People Podcast YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing a reading wrap up for all the books that I read in the month of October, and there were
2,000 years later.
10 that I finished reading in the month of October. A lot of those were audiobooks, but I'll say which ones that applies to as I go on. So the first book I read in October was Someone Like You by Karen Kingsbury. And actually I'm looking here on my Goodreads, so you're welcome to follow me there if you'd like. And I listened to this one, and I am not a huge Karen Kingsbury fan, but if I want to listen to some fiction that I know is not going to have inappropriate content, on occasion I will listen to or read one of her books. And this is a story following the Baxter family, which, if you know anything about Karen Kingsbury, you know she has like a million books about this family. Like everything that she writes is about this family. So this is number 30 actually, and I think this one just came out this year. So this was an interesting, actually out of the Karen Kingsbury stuff I've read, this one was on the more interesting side, and it has to do with frozen embryo adoption. So if that's anything that's remotely interesting to you, this book would probably be really entertaining for you. And of course there's like a love story there. And I'm not going to really give any more details. Basically, Maddie West is shaken to the core when she finds out that everything she believed about her life was a lie. Her parents had always planned to tell her the truth about her past, that she was adopted as an embryo. Somehow the right moment never happened. So that whole thing kind of unravels there. And I'm just reading from the summary on Goodreads, so I'm not telling you anything that's a spoiler that you couldn't read on your own. But I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars, which I felt like that was not too generous or anything. I felt like it was a reasonable review. So I would recommend that one, especially for Karen Kingsbury Christian fiction. The next one I finished, some people can argue that these kind of books don't count, but I have other homeschool moms that disagree, that if we read middle grade fiction and things like that, or like, intro chapter books, we mark them down. This book was over 100 pages long, so I think it counts for sure. This is Toys Go Out, Being the Adventures of a Knowledgeable Stingray, a toughy little buffalo, and someone called Plastic. So my 4-year-old homeschools, and he already reads, and so we read this book together. And I would say he's a little bit young for it. I think it would be better suited to like 7, 8 and older maybe, but he liked reading it, enjoyed reading it, and wanted to read it again, and again, different chapters of it. So it's not a story that necessarily builds on each chapter, but the kid could read one chapter as a standalone, and I think he really liked it. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Like, there were some parts of it that are like, oh, that's not age appropriate, like saying stupid and things like that I don't really want my 4-year-old to say. But on the whole, it was a fun little book of stories, and he enjoyed it. And we read that in a hard copy. Toys Go Out was a hard copy from the library. So the next thing I did was actually a trilogy, I guess. It was 3 books by Nancy Mell, the Kaylee Quinn Profiler series. And the book titles are Mind Games, Firestorm, and Dead End. And I will say these are supposed to be like romantic Christian fiction. And the romantic part was incredibly corny. Like, I feel kind of critical saying that, but like any scene that was supposed to be like kind of intimate-ish, even though she never really goes there, of course, because it's a Christian author or whatever, or writing style, it was so cringe. I just couldn't hardly handle it. But I will say, as the series went on, the books do build on each other, and the third one was the best one. So that's always kind of a good sign. I gave the first one 3 stars, the second one 2 stars, and the last one 4. So to get 4 stars from a Christian fiction, for me, is, almost as good as it's going to get for Christian fiction. I hate to be critical about that, but so on the whole, I would recommend that series. I will say that I don't generally continue to listen to something that I'm just totally not enjoying at all. So you're going to hear me say, I recommend that more often than not, because I just think there's too little time and too many books to spend reading stuff that's not very good. Those Nancy Mell books, that trilogy, I listened to all of those through Libby from our public library. and they were, as far as audiobooks go, they were pretty good. The narration and all that was fine. The next one I finished this month, which I actually started back in June, it looks like, was the Help Club for Moms. And this is more of a devotional for moms. I didn't realize that's what it was whenever I bought it, but it was, I read, one little section of it every day. I started it and then didn't pick it up again for a couple months. I'm thinking that's why it was so long that it was on my reading list, but I really wrapped it up in the month of October, and every day just had some encouragement and like helpful hints for moms. So it was really, it was pretty good. I would recommend it. We have a little visitor join us for the last half of this. Someone was hungry. So the next book that I read, and I actually read a hard copy of this one also, was Separated by the Border, a birth mother, a foster mother, and a migrant child's 3,000-mile journey. And it's by Gina Thomas. This book was really interesting. This is basically a memoir about a little girl from Honduras who she successfully crossed the border into the United States, and she was separated from her mother during the journey. And, kind of long story short, she ended up with a foster family in the United States. And this story was really interesting. I gave it 4 stars, so the story itself was interesting. I will say that if you're not into the social political commentary around immigration and you're not interested in reading about that, this book is not for you, because the author goes there and pretty, overtly goes there with her opinions and beliefs and criticisms of evangelical Christians for their lack of involvement on this issue. And so it was really inspiring in that way to kind of do something about this issue. And then also I would say like trigger warning on this book big time, because as you probably know, it's not uncommon for women and girls and probably even young boys and men even to experience abuse in the crossing of the U.S. border from Mexico. And there were some definitely like touchy points there that were hard to read. But I don't think, especially when something's really happened, I don't think that we should ignore that that's the reality of the situation for a lot of people. And I think by, not reading it, we try to pretend like it didn't exist and didn't happen. So I would recommend that book, especially if you're curious about that situation and like what that would even be like to cross the border and to not be born in America. It was interesting. So the next 2, I listened to both of them. The first one was The Things We Cannot Say by Kelly Rimmer. That was the best book I read probably this year so far. I listened to this one. I will say this is not a Christian book or publisher or whatever, and it did have more language than I prefer in a book, but it was spotty. It wasn't like every time this character talks, they just cuss constantly, or it wasn't consistent throughout the entire book. So I can handle intermittent and reasonable language. It was like made sense for the character, the place they were, and things like that. I think sometimes without any profanity, it doesn't give the character enough credibility for the reader. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. But at the same time, in my opinion, I don't want to fill my mind with profanity all the time. So it's a fine balance. But this book was awesome. It was historical fiction, but it bounced back and forth between historical fiction and present day. And I'll just read a little bit of the summary. 1942, Europe remains in the relentless grip of war. Just beyond the tents of the Russian refugee camp she calls home, a young woman speaks her wedding vows. It's a decision that will alter her destiny, and it's a lie that will remain buried until the next century. Since she was 9 years old, Alina, I don't remember how you say her last name, knew she would marry her best friend, Tomas. Now 15 and engaged, Alina is unconcerned by reports of Nazi soldiers at the Polish border, believing her neighbors that they pose no real threat, and dreams instead of the day that Tomas returns from college in Warsaw so they can be married. And basically, this story jumps back and forth between one of these characters in present day and one of these characters during the war. And it was just really, really good. I highly recommend it. Best book I've read this year, for sure. And I will say that as far as like scenes of intimacy go in this book, there were scenes where it was like you know, you knew stuff happened, but there was no explicit details. So I really appreciated that from the author. The last one I read in October was The Printed Letter Bookshop, and I listened to this one. It's by Catherine Ray, and she is a Christian author from what I can gather. I've listened to a couple of her other things, and as far as I know, pretty sure she's falling into that category. This one is about a character named Maddie or Madeline Cullen, who is basically left a bookshop by her recently deceased aunt, and it's just it's a fun book to read if you like books. So if you're not like a bookish person, I wouldn't start with this book. It's kind of a book nerd book. But I'll just read the quote on the end of the summary. The Printed Letter Bookshop is a captivating story of good books, a testament to the beauty of new beginnings, and a sweet reminder of the power of friendship. So I recommend this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and it prompted me to listen to another book or two by Catherine Ray that I have finished here halfway through November. So these are the books that I read in the month of October, a really good reading month for me. And I hope you'll find, you know, some of this information helpful and read at least 1 or 2 of these books. Let me know in the comments if you're going to read any of these books or if you have already. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the little notification bell. And until next time, we'll see you later.